This is Hunt Nebraska, the official podcast for insight into Nebraska's hunting and shooting sports community. Be sure to give us a follow on Facebook, our space for sharing stories, information, tips, and techniques. Now, Hunt Nebraska. Welcome back to the Hunt Nebraska cabin, folks. We appreciate you taking us along for the ride or into your office, or maybe you're even at home listening to us or watching us on YouTube. Make sure to give us a big thumbs up, subscribe, so that you know when each and every one of these new episodes drop. We're going to get into more and more regular episodes once again as we get through, well, kind of the end of the fall/winter hunting seasons for 23-24 and the start of all the 24 stuff that's right around the corner, or folks are taking advantage of perhaps the snow goose conservation order as they're listening to this as well. We've got three of us in the cabin today sitting down to talk a little bit more spring. We got Jeff Rawlinson, Nebraska Game and Parks, Michael Addison, National Wild Turkey Federation, and me, Hershy, also with the Nebraska Game and Parks. And gentlemen, I know it's only February, but it's nice outside.
Oh, it exudes the prospect of turkey season.
I mean,
yeah,
Michael, it really doesn't feel much like winter anymore.
No, it doesn't. I'm in fact, driving into work yesterday, I saw two gobblers strutting in a bean field.
Well, see, even though they
panting.
know.
They were panting. I remember seeing them.
They know what's going on. We've enjoyed some beautiful spring weather here at the end of our winter season. And as I always say, we're nervous folks in Nebraska and in the Midwest, to be honest with you. Anytime we get good weather, we know that Mother Nature kind of corrects herself every once in a while to get us to that average again. We go to both extremes.
It's outdoor guilt. We know if we got good weather, there'll be bad weather coming for sure. You know, it's just that outdoor guilt.
Usually we pay for it coming into it and after we've enjoyed it.
Pretty much. So. But that's kind of the way it happens, right? You get good weather, you just know. I mean, it won't last forever because it's Nebraska. It's going to be either hot or cold at some point. So you're just like, oh, this is wonderful. It won't last forever.
Yeah, you'll be wearing a parka at Easter brunch.
It's tough. It's tough.
Yep.
It will. But it definitely feels like the topic we're going to get into. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see the gobbler sitting here on the table. We got to talk a little turkey season. Michael, you just got back from the National Wild Turkey Federation convention recently, which had to be a quite the deal. Because is this your first one?
It's the first one I've been to.
What was your first thoughts walking in there?
It's pretty big.
It's big.
It is kind of a big deal. Yeah, it's a very big deal.
It is. I mean, the who's who of the hunting and shooting sports is there at convention. So there's a lot of walking around the show floor. You'll see a lot of people you recognize, from researchers to media personalities to all sorts of folks down there. And there's every brand you can imagine has a booth. Mossy Oak, of course, they were convention sponsors. Federal Premium, Winchester, all sorts of call makers, just about anybody you can think of is at convention.
It's kind of like a mini SHOT Show almost.
Almost,
yeah. You got, kind of the who's who almost. Yeah, it's a pretty cool deal.
It is, and you've got a lot of folks coming in to visit and rub elbows with those individuals that are a lot like us, interested in the outdoors, interested in conservation, interested in what's happening, especially spring turkey. I mean, that's kind of the draw there. But
the binding force. Now, I will say there's a lot of waterfowl calling going on the sports show floor. You hear a lot of duck and goose calls.
I've got to say, to be a hunter nowadays, you should be diversified.
Well, and nothing brings in a turkey like a goose call. I mean, we all know that, right? So, I mean, those guys are in the know as well. But
you're not supposed to give away those type of tips.
I've only been there twice, and I have to be honest with you. I was impressed, but I have to be honest. I thought there would be a lot more opportunities for getting for signatures for
giving signatures.
Yeah, no one asked me. Not one person asked me to sign anything.
They didn't know they were in the presence of greatness.
Well,
sure.
Yeah,
that's not
nobody
completely,
ever does apparently.
Not completely true, folks. I know that when he was checking out of the hotel, they asked for a signature, right? For those
Even
movies.
then, they said you can just stamp it, sir. I'm like, what? This will be never mind. It'll be worth money. You don't care.
But we're gonna jump into a few things, and if you've never turkey hunted, if you're listening to the Hunt Nebraska podcast and never been out for a spring turkey season, make this the year. There is very few things as addicting as spring turkey season when you start getting those gobbles echoing off the woods or through the fields here in Nebraska. It can be just gorgeous weather out there. A lot of things that you can attach to it as well. So to help out, Michael, we've got some cool things coming for those that are new or maybe want to, advance their skills when it comes to spring turkeys.
Yeah, so we're working on some calling clinics in Lincoln and Omaha. So partnering with Shields, hopefully we got one set up in Omaha, hopefully get one set up in Lincoln too. Trying to also here on the Hunt Nebraska page on YouTube and Facebook, try to get some videos out there for people, whether you're a beginner or even maybe some folks who are a little bit more experienced but looking for that next level of turkey hunting knowledge with some, videos on calling, ammunition types, all sorts of different topics as well. So hoping to get those out over the next couple months here as we get into the beginning of spring turkey season, and even maybe get a couple out there during the season for some, what you should be doing and changing up as the season goes along. Because we've got a long season here in Nebraska. It starts into March, ends in the end of May, and there's a lot that changes in the turkey woods over that month and a couple week time frame. So
that's well stated. Weather, Jeff, can be a big part of that. We've talked about that coming into our chat today, but you get everything when you start that early and go that long.
Yeah, weather plays a big role. Yeah, and that every hunter has to just kind of play it along. We got a long season. We got a lot of opportunity, but weather's going to play a big role in that. So again, you got to go with the punches. And if it isn't working out this weekend, but I will say this, and I have to be honest, if we all had stories, I bet they'd be very similar, regardless of the weather. When you have time to hunt, you get out there and hunt. And I've had some of the most phenomenal hunts in terms of harvest in some of the not so nicest weather. And early in my career, I remember one time it snowed, and we were up along the Niobrara, and we were like, "We're done. It snowed. We're out of here." And I learned something there because we pulled out the camping equipment and drove home, and it was like we're gonna come back later season. And that was back when we had different seasons, so we had to buy a different permit for the later season. Okay. And people had harvested birds while we were gone up there. And I remember thinking to myself, I thought we said it was impossible. When the weather's bad, you still got to figure it out. And those birds didn't go anywhere. They still got to do bird things.
So birds don't disappear whenever the weather gets bad. They just go to a different spot.
They just get meaner.
Yep.
No, and it might not be what we dreamed about going into the season, but sometimes, like you said, memorable hunts usually involve a little bit more than everything going as planned. And you'll probably heard me say it on our podcast here, folks, but I say it all the time. When you get to the end of a spring turkey season, you never look back and say, that went exactly as I thought it was going to. There's always something that these birds throw at you. Sometimes it's, boy, that happened even faster than I thought it was going to, or things really clicked. I didn't know that they were, or this spot I didn't hold a lot of hope for, just filled with gobblers, whatever it might be, but it rarely goes the way it's planned. So
there's one sure way for you to say that it did go exactly as you expected it to, and that's to expect that nothing will go as planned. Then the season's going to go as you expect it to.
That's about right. We've all had those hunts where you go, it went as planned. You're like going, man, I'm pretty good, right? But if you equate your being good to when it goes as planned, then every time, which is the norm, that doesn't go as planned, you got to go, well, I don't know what I'm talking about. So it has nothing to do with what you think is going to happen. I agree with that 100%.
And that's part of the draw, isn't it? I mean, if it went like it was supposed to every time, we probably wouldn't be as excited when it works out well. So with that said, we're going to get into this. Obviously, we're going to talk about spring turkey for some time. We're going to get a jump on it because we've got the workshops that Michael talked about. Check those out. OutdoorNebraska.gov is one way, or better yet, give us a like on Facebook, Hunt Nebraska, and you'll see those posted online events and all that stuff. So with that said, to kind of preface the area that I'm going to really zone in today with you two, how many years you been turkey hunting? And Michael, we'll go with you first because the math's probably a little bit quicker. Jeff has to carry a lot of ones.
A lot of algorithms, yeah.
And maybe subtract part of the year where he had to be chauffeured to the turkey woods.
Broken foot.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of consider that whenever I started going with my dad as when I started turkey hunting. So I'd say probably that was usually, I think I started when I was around 7 or 8 years old. So almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years.
That's pretty good.
Almost 20 years if you count. And the times whenever I was actually holding the gun and taking a shot, I mean, that was probably whenever I got up to like 11 or 12. So take a little bit off that. But I've been in the turkey woods for almost 20 years.
I'll give you credit because Jeff, I mean, to support this, you've probably gone calling for somebody else. But when somebody asks, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? I'm going turkey hunting. You don't say it. I'm taking a shotgun or I'm not taking the bow or whatever it is. You're going to go call for that.
Oh,
all right.
do that a lot. Yeah.
So, Jeff, what's your number?
35.
35 years now. That's pretty impressive since you're 38.
Yeah. Well, I started at a young age. I mean, it was camo diapers, and I was out there just killing it.
Now, just your parents dropping you off in the woods and driving away, not necessarily count as turkey hunting.
Who told you about that?
No. All right, so between the two of you, you guys have 55 years of turkey hunting experience.
Well, how many years you been hunting?
I haven't done the math. I was going to say about as many as you have, but I don't know about 35 years.
You were hunting when you were a teenager, weren't you?
I started in 1989, so what's that?
34 years.
Darn, that's a long time. So
I know how old you are.
Plenty. We got plenty. So now I want to think of some of your favorite stories. All right, because we all have our favorites, but I'm gonna whittle on that just a little bit more. Okay, I want to know. Here's the story, because I know we could fill several podcasts just talking about fun hunts and in times where things just connected, clicked, whatever it was, or memorable hunts, like you said, because of weather, because of conditions, because of people you hunted with, because of calls you've used and shotguns you've used and all that type of stuff. So what I'm going to have you zero in on is, tell me the story of a successful turkey hunt, and by that I mean a bird was harvested by you, that included the farthest shot you've taken to harvest a turkey. So basically the story of the bird that you shot at the farthest distance. I want to hear the story, and then we'll get into the distance, but you got to include that as well. But I want to hear the story. And if you guys need some time, I can tell you about mine.
No, I'm my farthest shot where I harvested a bird.
Yep, tell me the whole story. Set it up.
Well, it was out at my brother-in-law's place, and this is probably
Southeast Nebraska.
Yeah, 20 some years ago, and just got him into turkey hunting, and he was thinking this was pretty cool, and we had a couple blinds set up, and man, I had heard birds, but I hadn't seen anything all morning long. And back then, that was a little bit more rare, right? If you hear birds, you're going to see birds just about. And but I just a few times I heard this gobbler, off into to the west, but he wasn't. I was like, God, I'm sure he's on the property. We're only talking 40 acres, so I'm sure he's on the property.
Ooh, nice.
So I decided to leave my blind, and I just waved at my brother-in-law as I left my blind, and I saw he left his blind to kind of come in behind me.
He gave you a different hanging signal?
Yeah, he did. And we started walking through the woods, and he stopped, and I just kept going, and I came out into the opening of this meadow. And there were several gobblers out in the middle of that meadow, and I mean they were right out in the middle there, and with some hens. And the closest Tom was just so busy strutting that he had no clue that I had just kind of creeped through the woods, and I was right on the edge of the woods there. And the others looked at me and started kind of walking away a little bit, but he was so busy strutting he could have just cared less. And of course, when they're strutting, they got that big tail feather fan blocking their view, right? So if their butt's towards you, they can't see you.
Yep.
And so anyway, so I moved out to the edge of the field there, and I'm totally out in the open, and he's out there probably a good 50 plus yards, and he breaks strut, and I put it right on his neck and pulled the trigger, and he just dropped like a sack of bricks. I mean, just hit the ground, boom. And then of course the flip and flop was on, but and I remember walking out there, and I remember thinking to myself, I should have been there by now. I'm still not doing it. Might have been a longer shot, but no, I know that field, and so it was probably about 55-yard shot.
Okay.
That was a long shot for me. That's probably a longer shot than I should have taken at the time, but it worked, so I can't argue with it. But that was a long shot.
All right, open field.
So honestly, I don't take a lot of long shots. I like to get my birds in pretty close. I think the longest shot I've taken is about 35 yards.
35 yards, okay.
That I harvested a gobbler at. And so this is a fun story. I like telling this one. I got up late this morning hunt. I had hunted pretty hard the several days, because I think this was a couple of years ago. This was back during COVID. I was still in college. So at the time, we were all doing everything from home. So I was able to hunt pretty much every day is spring turkey season, around my class schedule and whatnot. So I got up kind of late. I've been hunting several mornings in a row, and got up kind of late this morning. Got out to the woods about 9:30 or so. Walked up, sat up in a spot, and probably sat there for about an hour and 15 minutes. Called every 15 minutes or so, and never heard anything. No gobbles. Nice morning, but no gobbles or anything. And I'm getting up, and I'm trying to decide, okay, I'm going to move on from this spot, which I'm at my grandparents' farm. And moving out there is like moving, 50 yards here, 50 yards there. It's not the area of the property that's not cattle pasture, that's actually good to hunt, is not too big. It's probably like a 40-acre section of woods or so. So I'm debating moving down to this little clearing where we've got our old deer stand set up. And I'm sitting there, I'm trying to pick between 3 different trees that I'm going to go sit at. And I'm standing there for probably 2 or 3 minutes. I can't make up my mind where I want to go. And I had just about made up my mind that I was going to go about 25 yards or so to the north, when out there on the gravel road that runs alongside the property, I heard this truck just peel out and start spitting gravel everywhere. And about that time, about 65 yards off to my right, I hear just thundering gobble. I didn't do it very much justice there in the rendition, but just a thundering gobble off to my right. And I thought, oh crap. And so I sat back down in a hurry, and I just got popped in a mouth call and got my shotgun up and just gave it a couple of soft yelps there, and they didn't even gobble at those, but they came walking right in, and they were walking towards the fence. And I was about 45 yards from the fence line or so. So to kind of set up the shot a little bit, I'm sitting on the back end of a little clearing. There's a big oak tree kind of up towards the middle of it, towards a truck path. And there's this clearing. I'm sitting on the back end of it, and it kind of slopes down. It's a gradual slope down towards the creek bottom. And I'm sitting there, and I can see their heads popping up about 45 yards or so up off to my right, and they're heading towards the fence, and I'm sitting there trying to do some quiet yelps and stuff and clucks and purrs, and I was not nearly as good on the mouth call as I am now. So my clucks and purrs went, and I was just kind of...
Well, nothing makes you more excited and harder to call than when birds...
That's true. My heart was pounding, and so what I decided to do is I had seen a YouTube video a few days before talking about scratching in the leaves behind you. It was like so I did that. I reached back behind me and scratched in the leaves a little bit, and by God, the lead gobbler, and I paired that with and I happened to finally get a decent cluck out when I did it. And that lead gobbler heard that, poked his head up, turned around, and come walking right towards where I was at. And as soon as his head got up over that little rise, and I confirmed red head, beard, okay, dropped him right there. And it was I measured it on my Onyx, and it was about 35 yards or so.
35 yards.
Where I dropped him. So
Onyx. And yours measured by what tool?
Pacing. Onyx. See, they didn't have Onyx back. I had to walk it off. Like I said, I remember thinking this is a long way to get
and
there.
I thought, I'm kind of like Jeff. I thought he was closer than that when I shot him. I walked up there the last 10 yards or so, and I was like, oh, he's a little further away than I thought he was.
Keep that in mind. That's a good story. It's always kind of fun to hear what turkeys will shot gobble to. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we overthink it because we know, well, that's a truck and that there's some Yahoo doing this. Turkeys don't know that. That's just a loud noise for the most part. So if it hits the frequency they like or what have you, then boom.
And I was going to walk right to where they were at. That's the direction I was heading in. I was going to walk right at him and bump him.
Probably bump him.
So
luck.
So that was, pretty lucky on my part.
What's interesting is the one that pops into my mind, and I'll make this kind of quick, share some similarities with both of you guys' stories. So this was several years ago. I remember that because my turkey gun at the time was a single shot, I believe, New England Arms 10-gauge turkey gun.
Ooh.
And that thing was a cannon. I mean, you needed wheels to get it back and forth in the field at times, but when it spoke with authority. As long as you had it kind of pointed in the right general direction, it threw a marvelous pattern. Still haven't used it for many years, but I was hunting my father-in-law's spot, who lives in eastern Iowa, and it's a spot I'd hunted before on his ground and kind of that area. But what I didn't calculate this morning, and this is what it shares in common with your story right off the bat, Michael, is the sun comes up a lot earlier over there on that side of the time zone than it does on this side of the time zone.
No.
So the time I'd been getting up and going turkey hunting for a few days already didn't quite work there. So I roll out of bed and it's already at that perfect gobbling time. I was like, oh, poop. I had to throw my clothes on fast, grab that heavy shotgun and head out, and the turkeys were already talking. And luckily one sounded off not that far from his back step, and I kind of had a general idea of where it was. So I kind of got on one of the mini trails he had cut there for him and my mother-in-law to hike and walk and all that stuff, and tried to circle down below it. I actually wanted to get below it because I knew where it was, crop grounds on top, timber down below by the river, and usually they get down that river and start moving throughout the day just wherever they want to go. They'll pop out in those crop fields, don't get me wrong, but early in the morning they're moving. They're going to follow those hens and that type of stuff. And while I was circling around that turkey, I heard thump, 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 thump. I heard the wings coming out of the tree, and I'm thinking, uh-oh. I had already luckily got between him and the river, and I kind of set up as fast as I could, gave a couple quick yelps with the mouth call. He answered right back, but he'd flown down in the bean field right there on the edge of the woods. And I could tell the next time I kind of gave him a cluck, he gobbled, and you could tell he was just walking right down along that edge. And I needed to get a little bit closer, so I was able to use the trees and some of the cedars to sneak just a little bit closer, got set up. And like you said, I think he heard scratching the leaves because he sounded again, or it was just coincidence. Mm-hmm. And just like, boy, he's close.
Nope.
And I think I might have clucked one more time, and he answered, and he just all of a sudden, boom, he's there. And like I said, open field, you mentioned that, Jeff, with your story. This bird is out there, and he's interested, and he stops, when he gobbles, and he kind of half puff. He wouldn't ever go into full strut for whatever reason, but he was just kind of trying to call me, the hen, out to that field, which I'm not moving, folks. And so he got right there. I put the old, brass bead on him, so to speak, pulled the hammer, and just down he went. Just down he went. I was like, holy smokes. I don't think I'd been awake for 15 minutes. And I've already tagged a gobbler. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be cool. So I, single shot, you open it up, lay it down, go to get that bird. Had the exact same thought that you mentioned, Jeff. I'm walking and just like, wait a second.
I should be there by now. You stop and go,
stop. How far is he again?
Step. And I grabbed him. I mean, he hardly moved at all after he had a couple of quick flops and done. I mean, just that's kind of what I expected. I was thinking it was going to be maybe a 30-yard shot. But I decided after I picked him up and started walking back to where I had my call and the shotgun was laying, my cushion at that time, it was just a little foam pad. I decided to start, like you said, start paces. Didn't even think about OnX. I'm not even sure if I had a phone at this time in my life. And I started going, and I quit right around 54, and I still had a little ways to go into the fence on the where I was. So very similar in length, but it was kind of like, oh man, he wasn't as close as I thought he was.
No, they can deceive you really easily. Sometimes they can deceive you,
especially when you start chasing these open land birds, and that's something I've learned. I actually, folks, you'll hear me talk about this in some of the workshops. One of the things I didn't think I'd ever carry that I got into it for bow hunting for deer, just to take and measure distances, is a rangefinder, and I have found that to be useful on some of these areas where you're deep in the cedars or in the woods along a ravine or something, and they're out in the open, or vice versa, just to get an idea. Shadows play. We've gone through the Tom Roster lethality studies where he does estimation, all that type of stuff, and lighting plays into it. Angle of the critter to you plays into it. It can be kind of deceiving. Now I know that way, especially if I've got a hunter that wants to make sure that they shoot within 20 yards, I can say, all right, they're at 25. Give them a couple more steps. All right, 18, you better pull the trigger before they get too close.
And it seems the most deceiving for me is when you are in the woods and that bird's out into like a cornfield or a bean field or something, and there's just no no good way of measuring the depth. And so you look at him out there and you think, oh gosh, he's got to be 35, 40 yards, and but you drop a bird and then you go out there and it's like, well, there's a lot of cornfield between you and that bird, and it just got farther and farther. And so you look at it and go, sometimes that out in an open field can be really deceiving.
Yeah, there's no good reference point around. Yeah. That's a big deal with that.
So now here's the question then. All right, here's the question that I really want to get into, and this is being spawned on. I got my recent issue of Fish and Game magazine out there, the one that covers Nebraska, and they kind of talked about this a little bit on the edge, and it really got me thinking. And folks, I've asked both of these gentlemen to speak in definitive terms and not give the marketing answer or anything along those lines. Or
Hershey, I'm a marketing guy. That's hard for me.
The Daryl Bauer It Depends line. So we're going to be doing some events talking about hunting spring turkeys, and we're going to have a lot of folks that this might be their very first year or maybe second. They just haven't got a shot at a turkey. So keep in mind, I'm setting this up. A new hunter comes up to you and asks this question. I need an answer. I don't need a vague nuance. We'll get into that soon enough. What's the longest distance you should shoot a turkey with a shotgun? We'll add that right in there because it's different for archery, or if you're out west in some of those states that in certain seasons allow rifle, it might be different. But for a shotgun, what's the longest distance you should shoot a turkey?
The longest distance that you've patterned that gun at?
I want a number. I want a number here.
Depends on your gun.
I want a number. No, see, we just said that doesn't count, right?
Okay. What you shooting a 410 or are you shooting a 12 gauge?
I'm saying shotgun.
Okay, but a 410 is a lot different than a 12 gauge, isn't it? So I mean that
I don't know. Is it?
Yeah, it is. And so
is it depending on? Isn't it more?
You're going to throw 50 BBs or 300 BBs?
Isn't it more?
We're shooting lead or tungsten.
Exactly. I'd say nowadays probably more the shell. Than
it's that too. But the 410 runs out of pattern a lot closer than a 12 gauge.
If there was a number that you were going to pull out of your pocket, what would it be? Try to get them to. How many yards?
35 yards is where I really like to have them. 35, 40 yards max is where I really like to have turkeys. Now, yeah, definitively 35, 40 yards.
40.
Michael?
40. I pattern my gun at 25 and 40.
40 yards.
See, it goes back to what you've patterned it at, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Jeff's right. But if we want a definitive answer.
Hold on, say that again. Say it slowly.
And here's the debate, and it really does kind of open up some interesting avenues, because to me, I've always viewed spring turkey hunting, and maybe turkey hunting in general with a shotgun, being the closest to bow hunting you can get hunting a critter with a firearm. Because to me, there is a point where you can get them too close, but I want them within bow range oftentimes, which for me is that 20 yards. That's just magical. I know I can make that shot. 25, not a big deal, and that type of stuff. However, as you guys are kind of alluding to, and we're not going to get into marketing, and we're not going to get any specific shot shell, we're not getting any specific chokes or firearms or anything like that. Technology is always kind of pushing that edge, right?
Yep.
Always pushing that distance. And it's not unheard of to hear people say, I shot this turkey at 60, 70 yards.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And this type of this and that combination of that, whatever it is kind of changed it. We've seen that with rifles, right? There are folks that would much rather shoot a critter, Absolutely. A deer, an elk, whatever, saying I shot at 400 yards than saying I shot at 150.
Yeah. And I'd rather all my deer be under 10 yards. Absolutely, not turkeys, but I'd rather all my deer and my deer be under 10 yards. Now, I can tell you this, the 90% of the turkeys I've ever shot have been in that 15-yard mark. Because that's where I set my decoys for shotgun, and they come right up to the decoys usually.
They come up to the decoys.
So I don't usually shoot long distance. To me, 35, 40 yards, that's a long shot. That's getting out there ways. But again, I will say it absolutely. I think just giving a number without any knowledge of any other factors could be somewhat irresponsible. Because I think some people can give a number and say 50 yards, and I can tell you right now, there's a huge difference between 40 yards and 50 yards. And if you haven't patterned that gun and know exactly what it's capable of doing. That's a recipe for not so good.
I'll toss it out. Even if you give out a number, 3 here, and between the three of us, we got a bunch of years of experience. it doesn't take much to mess up that estimation side of it to where that number really doesn't mean a whole bunch unless you've got a way to measure it.
Yep.
And like you said, terrain can play into it. There's some spots in Nebraska where you can shoot a bird from one ridge across the other, and it's within range, but it might take you 15 minutes to crawl down and back up to go pick it up, type thing. But so even tossing a number out, it's probably, how do you gauge that?
Yeah. Are you going to shoot a bird across the creek? Well, how are you going to go get the bird?
So usually, if we're talking about gauging, usually what I like to do is I pick out, I have a pretty good general idea of what 25, 30 yards looks like in my head. And I pick, if it's a tree, a shrub, or something that about fits that distance in my mind. And I visualize an arc that goes from my left side to my right side with that point in it. And then once I visualize that, and once a bird crosses over that, okay, I'll take a shot then.
That is a smart way to do it and that's the way I do it when I'm archery deer hunting and I've got a rangefinder. I'm not out there with the rangefinder most of the time waiting for that deer to come up and like, all right, he's at 17 yards. Oh, yeah, he's at 22, whatever. I'm doing that. Yeah. Be prepared. All right. Once they come past that tree, they're within 20 yards. Everything else it's the same pin.
Yep.
What have you. That is a smart way to do that, to be able to kind of pick those. What have you heard any tricks? I know the old timers used to have tricks to let you know when a turkey was in range, according to the old ideas, if you will.
And again, for me, because I like decoys, I like to use decoys. I'm not running and gunning a lot. I like to sit down and put decoys out. So the easiest trick is if you pace off that decoy, pretty easy to gauge the distance. Is he at the decoy? Is he twice as far from the decoy? Is he, 3 times as far, what have you? And so the decoy is my barometer, and it helps greatly.
What if you're not using a decoy?
I just don't seem to have a lot of problem gauging distance on birds. Once in a while, I've had a shot that's, like I said, it's out there ways, but usually those you kind of know. But I've passed on birds that just aren't close enough, in my opinion. But I couldn't tell you how far they were.
That might be because you've got 35 years of experience to draw on.
A lot of that comes from experience in the woods.
Where a new hunter doesn't necessarily have that. One of the things that stuck with me, and folks, it's again like everything else. There's variables in it. I can remember going to a turkey hunting workshop years ago, just as things were really getting going in my area, and I read it in books later on in magazines as well. Look at the eye. If you can not just see a dot there, but if you can start making that eye out just a little bit more and the skin around it, they're probably getting close enough to be in an effective range. And it's something at least gives you, it's kind of like baseball players or softball players where they're looking, okay, that was a fastball. How do I ever catch up with that? Well, you look for the seams. You look for little details. You look for stuff to kind of help slow everything down. In the case of playing ball, that slows down the spin of the pitch. In turkey hunting, it's just that now I'm not looking at the whole bird, which gets bigger and bigger. And if he puffs up, my goodness, he's huge. Mm-hmm. It's now I got a small spot that I'm going to be aiming towards anyway, or at close to, and it's going to help me zoom in a little bit. But it is interesting. How long ago did the real long range big game phenomenon really kind of start, Jeff? I mean, right now it's still at fever pitch.
Oh, you mean for like deer and elk and whatnot? Oh, gosh. Yep. Probably, 10, 15 years ago when that really started kicking in the last 7, 8 years when you really started hearing about all these different rifles that were, quote unquote, built for long range and scopes, 15 years or so that you've had, you say, well, these were built for long range. But honestly, every rifle we've had since the 50s has been capable of long range. It's usually the hunter who wasn't as capable of long range.
But you think about it in the shotgun world, the things that have changed. I mean, our choke tubes, you and I, when we first started hearing an extra full was like, what?
Yeah. Whatever came with that Remington shotgun is what you were using on turkeys.
And, we were shooting lead, which is nice and smooth. Dense, and we got, even when I started, it was still, there was a little argument about whether I'm using big pellets so I can body shoot them or I'm using bird shot so I can get them in the head. And we've kind of gotten past that. But also, like you said, the pellets have changed.
Yeah.
I mean, now we've got dense pellets on that tungsten.
It's kind of the good old days, to be honest with you, because what you and I had to deal with, Hershy, was we had to either go big pellets with very few of them or small pellets that had very little energy, but there was a bunch of them. Yeah, and then we started dinking around with like Heavy Shot and some of these others that were a little bit heavier, and so it allowed us to up the volume of pellets and reduce the size. But we weren't talking necessarily about reducing the size of pellets yet. We were more along maybe a size, you go down a size, but the reality of it is we were saying, well, you can go like 5 and 6s, and with Heavy Shot go 6s because it was just that much denser. But today we're in pellets and this is just phenomenal. And I can tell you right now, I'm a supporter, but pellets like Heavy Shot, tungsten, iron, whatever.
TSS. Super Shot.
Yeah, Super Shot. And now we're going just off the chart. Now we're going all the way up to number like 8 shot or even 9 shot.
Nines, I've seen a lot of nines.
Which for a lot of states they had to redo their regulations because they didn't allow small shot like 9 something you use on the trap range, right? You want to get a little dusting off that.
Nines were hard to find until a few years ago.
Absolutely.
Period.
And now all of a sudden with TSS you're starting to see 9s and 8 and 9s or 7s and 9s in a shell, and you start going, what does that do? Well, it gives you an incredible pattern. Because now all of a sudden you're back to 500 BBs in a shell, and each one of those hits with the same energy as a bowling ball, and I mean they don't stop, they go through, they just keep penetrating, and so they're pretty good compromise. Really.
Do you remember? And I think it might still be printed on some of the back of our turkey targets that Nebraska Game and Parks has made available off and on throughout the years. And it talks about how to pattern and all that type of stuff. And this is where I think it gets interesting from real world to what we see and like to brag about online. Again, we're just talking about 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that has the outline of a turkey, and sometimes you show the brain and the spinal cord and all that type of stuff. Do you remember, Jeff, how many pellets we suggested they needed to get in there of the appropriate size to kill a turkey cleanly?
In the head region, I think we said like 7 pellets or something like that.
6, yep.
Yeah, something like that.
Yep, exactly.
And a certain amount of pellets in a 30-inch circle.
And yep, that's the Tom lethality tables and all that stuff concept, which is pretty cool. And like you said, now these small pellets have about as much energy as some of those bigger pellets.
But you'll be getting 30 or 40 into them in that same pattern.
Just one of the things I'm going to talk about here is we definitely have gotten into the craze of tighter's better. And I'll argue all day long, if I get a turkey in the range that I'm wanting to shoot at, tightness probably starts working against me at some point because you have to now start using a reflex sight or something like that. You remember when they first put a scope on top of a shotgun for turkeys?
I thought it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in my entire life.
And you're thinking, well, how am I going to keep that sighted in? What am I going to do? I mean, this is a random cloud and now it's some of those patterns are so tight, I don't know how you would be able to aim without something like that.
They're too tight. In fact, today, we used to say how important patterning was 20 years ago when you were just dealing with lead shot, or people were going with steel shot because it patterned really, really well for some folks. But today, patterning is probably more important than ever because, you start getting with these heavier, denser shots and you constrict it too tight with these super full turkey. When I learned to talk. Man.
All that stuff.
Super full turkey choke tubes, and you start to get really irregular patterns sometimes.
Start bouncing pellets off of each other.
My pattern's a Carlson tube, and really what it does, it's probably no tighter than a modified, but what it does is it strips the wad away from the BBs.
See, I'm glad you brought up wads because that's the other thing. We've got wads now that keep that shot column together longer. Mm-hmm. They're designed to do that so that it can give you greater pattern density at further distances. You've got some now that deploy from the back rather than the old standard, which you use from trap loads to bird shot. Pedaled out as soon as it left the barrel,
so
peel
they
back,
separate back from the shot,
and all that type of stuff. But all that's made for tighter patterns. So the pellets, like you said, some of the pellets out there made to stick together tighter.
Yeah.
You put it in a wad that's made to keep the pellets together for longer so it doesn't spread out. And then you constrict it down through a tighter tube that's amplifying and all that type of stuff. And now you see those patterns where, like you said, 20, 30 pellets where they're talking 90%, or greater pattern density and all that type of stuff. And now you get right back to it's shooting like a rifle. You better have something on it that's going. And we come back to the whole thing, and this is what I always give people a hard time from. If I get 6 of my number 6 or number 5 pellets in that turkey, he's dead. If I get 12 of those number 6 pellets in his head,
he's deader.
Yeah, maybe by 50%.
More dead.
50% more dead.
It just depends on what kind of pictures you like to take on after the hunt. Because I gotta assume there are some turkeys that weigh more once the once the trigger's pulled.
Well,
yeah, this turkey's like an ounce heavier than it was.
And this is where we get this discussion on extended ranges, right? Because now all of a sudden with some of these shots, with some of these dense pellets, if you're shooting 9-shot, you're gonna pepper that target, and it looks like pepper. It looks like somebody just peppered it, and you go back out. So okay, that's my 35 yards is my normal patterning range. What's it do at 45, 55, 65, 70 yards, and you're still getting 7 pellets in that 70-yard range, and you start going, is this actually lethal at 70 yards? Well, here's the deal. Here's what it doesn't tell you, because it can be. If those BBs go right through the brain or something like that, that's a dead bird. It's just as dead as a 30-yard bird probably. But what they don't factor into all this is between 0 and 20 yards and 0 and 75 yards is there's a lot of things a turkey can do movement wise while your brain's saying pull the trigger. And so you have to. It's just like a bow hunter. The farther out, a lot of things can happen for that arrow. You release that arrow, it's got to get there still. Yep. And so that's something that people need to take in mind. Sure, this will shoot through a piece of tin at 70 yards, so it'll shoot through turkey bones. But that piece of tin isn't moving, it isn't thinking, it isn't going anywhere. But that turkey is, and so you need to take those into account.
That, and Michael, I know I've done a lot of shooting of turkey loads and shotguns here at our indoor ranges at the Turpin Outdoor Education Center, and I'm guessing if the three of us went in right now with our turkey setup, choke, ammo, put up a piece of paper at 25 yards, I bet you all three of our wads are going through that paper.
Oh, absolutely.
Just the way that they're made. They're a little stiffer at times, and like I said, the way they deploy a little different oftentimes as well, which is neither here nor there other than saying that it just shows you, I know I've bounced wads off a turkey at 20 yards out there that I never did before, and it looks really good because now wow, look at this, I got this big hole in the paper. You just got to remember, wait a sec, that's my wad. That doesn't count.
It's a pretty inert piece of plastic. And that's why, in some of these newer technologies that are designed, or choke tubes that strip the wad away from the BBs early on, you'll see wads sometimes in some of these newer shells, especially waterfowl loads. You'll see wads out there 10, 15 yards in front of the blind, because as soon as they leave the gun, they just start floating back. Yeah, they start pulling back, and then they just float out there into the air, and 15 yards or 20 yards they're down. And so, there's just a lot of things at play, and it's not overly complicated, but a person does want to take all that into account, because like you said, Hershey, I think you're spot on. Super full choke tube, you got a wad that's made for better patterns, and turkey's now 10 yards. Pretty soon your real room for error is about that big. And we did that at BOW one year, and we were having the ladies shoot it, I think it was 5 yards and then out to like 60 yards. And it was amazing how many ladies, which certainly hit the head of the turkey at 5 yards, but put a hole right next to the head of the turkey, or right off the edge of its skin, like thinking to yourself, those are clean misses. And you'd think, how could you miss it? Well, because you're shooting a slug almost at 5 yards.
Well, yeah, and very few people will take that shotgun that is set up to be shot more like a rifle now and shoot it from a rest.
Yeah.
Whether that's the knee, whether that's
no fun.
Tripod or anything like that. And now you're holding a 7-pound piece of wood and iron and man-made materials out there. And if you've got to pause at any time as that bird moves, then all of a sudden everything starts going into it. Folks, we're kind of running out of time here. Don't want to make this more complicated than it is. We will provide some thoughts and ideas if you come to some of our workshops, and what we use and what we see is very beneficial, especially for those that are starting out. It is a whole world of opportunity out there, which means there's some decisions to be made. But the neat thing is, whether you're letting those turkeys to get within 10 yards or you're taking them now out at 40 yards, we've got ways that can make that happen depending on what you're trying to get out of the hunt and want to experience out there. But we will fill you in on all those details as we get closer to turkey season and especially when we get into some of these turkey hunting workshops in the spring. So I think we're going to leave it right there, guys. I'm pumped now.
I'm excited.
Talking turkey. I always got to do that transition from the end of waterfowl season to spring turkey. That's quite a jump, and the weather helps, but talking turkeys always makes it happen.
Let's go do some patterning.
Ooh.
Sounds
all
like
right,
a good
I'll
idea.
watch.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Until next time.
Hunt Nebraska, brought to you by your Nebraska Game and Parks Commission.